What's going on, folks? Welcome to a valued conversation, Gen X spoken word. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get into this today here, but I'm going to let the music run just for a moment. I want you to take close note of this image that you're seeing. Anyone who is here right now joined, or whether or not you are watching this inside of the chat on replay. As always, I will continue to say this. I've got many hours that I need to do. So therefore, whether you join me or you don't, the content is always going to be available. All right, so let's go ahead and sit back and let Roots Maneuver talk to us about this. Witness the fitness. All right, what's going on, everybody who just joined? Thank you for getting in a little bit of time to sit down with me and go through a few things that have gotten to the point that we need to have this discussion, and we need to do it now. So as I said before, I'll say it again, welcome to a valued conversation, Gen X spoken word. I appreciate anyone who's at the time to tune in right now. Hopefully you're going to get something out of this, because we are sitting here at the point of contention, where we're actually seeing our history being challenged by folks from inside our own diaspora. Folks attempting to claim history for themselves that they have not worked for. That's pretty much in a nutshell. FBA has no history. They have no legacy. They have no icons. Anything and everything that they do speak of has already come before them, done by somebody else. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this and let's get into it. Now, let me know if the music is a little bit too loud in the background. But again, I like to have a little bit of sound just to keep things going. I like to kill some of the dead air that's happening. Hopefully my conversation does not become dead air to anyone who is watching. Give me a moment just to move this reference out of the way. So we are gathered here today to discuss this issue inside of the Black community, that which is FBA. And the title of today's show, the Self-Tethering Ideology of FBA. So for those of you who are just hearing this expression right now, or not even familiar with what FBA stands for Foundational, Black Americans. Now, these are a swath of Blacks who have broken off from ADOS, American descendants of slavery. Not too much difference between these groups here, but they are advocating that reparations are only due to those Blacks who can trace their lineage directly to slavery. Now, if anyone has been keeping up with me, I've been making my rounds on TikTok. I've been making my rounds on YouTube as well. But still, I have been taking it upon myself, as many others are, to ensure that this concept of FBA does not further cause any detriment or undermine the history of African Americans in America, or Africans as a whole throughout the diaspora, that has been suppressed by scientific racism for centuries. Just over the last 80 to 100 years or so, there's been recognition that has been proven to show that Africa has played a prominent part in the development of Western Europe, of civilization in and of itself. But you would never know that based upon information that has been kept and put off to the side and discarded, because in no way, shape, and form, per the minds of the 18th and 19th century scientists, or those who consider themselves anthropologists, would they ever let it believe that anything of cognizance or consciousness could have come from Africa. Because when we think of Africa, or our African descendants, aka Black Americans, we think of three things: disease, starvation, poverty. That's primarily what you get when you consider the concept of Africa, or anyone who is descended from there. Stand by for a moment. So I'm not sure how prominent that music is to everyone out there, but it's pretty distinct over here to me. So I'm going to drop it down a little bit more. So as I was saying here, this whole aspect of foundational Black American, if I were to put out a theory, I would say that these folks have bought into the lies, the misinformation, and the general discourse that has been spoken of about Africa, about its descendants, about African Americans, to the point now that, oh, we don't want to associate with them. Their history is not our history. Our history began in the United States. As I've said before, that's like saying that you didn't come from your mother. You just came to be in existence. Or you're going to, as they like to misuse the term, well, let me use the term properly, delineate. It means to specify. It does not mean to separate from, which people have a general tendency to misuse if they're not familiar with the term and how it's actually supposed to be utilized. It's to specify one from the other, not to separate. But these individuals like to say that we have a rich and unique history in America that no one else has, which is a damn lie. The rich and unique history that FBA likes to speak of is the history that was actually achieved by African Americans of distinction, those who actually toiled in the fields, those who endured slavery. They are the ones who have this history that FBA loves to claim that is theirs and only theirs. Now, here's a question that I have for you, all right? Put a 1 in the chat, whether you're watching this in real time right now on the live, or even if you are watching this from the replay. Put a 1 in the chat if you knew that Africans were slaves in Spain before Columbus even sailed for the New World. Again, put a 1 in the chat if you knew this. Put a 2 in the chat if you did not. Let me add greater clarity to this. I don't want to get too far off the beaten path, but there's some things that need to be established as a baseline. For the slaves in Spain before Columbus sailed for the New World. This was not part of the show here, but I felt that it might be good to, as I said, give us a baseline. Audio. All right, so here's the question that I just asked it. Were there slaves in Spain before Columbus sailed for the New World? So the answer is yes. Slavery existed in Spain well before Columbus sailed in 1492. By the mid-15th century, cities like Seville and Valencia had significant enslaved populations, with African slaves, North American Muslims, Moors, and Canary Island natives, Guanches, traded in the Iberian Peninsula. Now, for those who did not know or do not know, the Iberian Peninsula is what we now call Spain and Portugal. But around, I want to say, the 8th century, 711 AD, the Iberian Peninsula was conquered by the Muslims. But here's where context needs to be put to that. And this goes back to, as I said before, 18th and 19th century anthropologists who did not want to give any type of prominence to Africa. Because when you look at this specifically, it wasn't per se Moors, or as you were, it wasn't Muslims that conquered the Iberian Peninsula. It was Africans. All right, there were Africans who were converted to Islam who conquered the Iberian Peninsula. Again, put a 1 in the chat if you knew this. Put a 2 in the chat if you did not know this. So I'm gathering a grand amount of folks did not know this information, that you're probably hearing about it for the first time. Now, this is damn sure information that FBA knows nothing about, because the rhetoric in which they speak is all swirling around maybe the last 15, 20 years at best. We'll give them, I'll be fair, I'll give them 30 years. 30 years of existence to where there's been nothing but misinformation, conspiracy, and overall lies, and probably a good part of embarrassment about what has been presented about Africans. Therefore, we're not associated with these Bigfoot Africans. Now, this is what I've heard directly spoken, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's all of FBA. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that I haven't heard African Americans speak negatively of Africans, speak negatively of Jamaicans, of Haitians, of the Black or the African population in Brazil. I'm not going to act like I haven't heard anyone speak negatively of them, nor will I act as if I have not heard anybody else in the diaspora, speak negatively of African Americans. But even if you were to hear that, that does not mean that the diaspora as a total entity looks down on each other from a global aspect. That is an argument that you will find folks from the FBA ideology attempting to make to justify their divisive anti-Black immigrant rhetoric. So let's move away from my soapbox for a second, get back into this. The source of slaves. In the 15th century, slaves arrived in Spain by Mediterranean trade routes and the Atlantic trade pioneered by Portugal. So keep in mind now, England was not the first. Now, truth be told, if we were to go further back, before Spain even started trafficking in Africans, Africans were already being trafficked from Africa to the Arabian Peninsula since the 6th, or actually the 7th or 8th century. So Africans have been slaves to damn near everybody in the Mediterranean. Again, put a 1 in the chat if you already knew that Africans had been trafficked to the Arabian Peninsula since the 7th or 8th century. In fact, just put a 1 in the chat if you even knew that the Arabs were trafficking Africans to the Arabian Peninsula. Put a 2 if you never knew that, and this is new to you as of right now. So the biggest question that I look at is, how is it that the last batch of enslaved, right, I'm talking about the Africans who were brought to America, not the ones who were brought from Africa to the Arabian Peninsula, starting back in the 7th or 8th century, not the Africans that were brought to Spain and were a part of Spanish society before Christopher Columbus even sailed to the New World. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about knowing that there were slave trades the world over before we even, as African American descendants, touched the ground in America. So I'm just going to leave this here for you guys to read if anyone is interested in doing so, all right? So there's a fair amount of history that is not even recognized or even acknowledged by FBA. But yet, the last batch, as I said, the last batch who arrived in America, which was our African-American descendants who were derived from their African descendants who were taken from Africa, all right? We were the last ones to get here, but yet we are going to take it upon ourselves, or should I say they, FBA, are going to take it upon themselves to determine who is eligible for reparations. Let's do this now. Let's go ahead and let me give you a gander. Let me give you a gander of this. So you know what? I'm not going to be playing any audio as of yet. So we'll do this. Let me just stay at the tab. All right, so observe. So when did the term foundational Black Americans start? I should put begin, but you get the gist of it. Where did it come from? Foundational Black Americans is a term used to describe the descendants of enslaved Africans in the United States, with a specific focus on those whose ancestors built the country, often tracing their history to the arrival of enslaved people in Virginia in 1619. All right, so obviously this is incorrect. Now, I'm not going to say all of it is wrong, but this is what happens when you don't put certain parameters on your inquiries when you're doing searches with AI. Now, AI is a good thing. It helps. It can search a lot faster than we can. However, if you do not put borders around what you're looking for, AI will arbitrarily fill in the gaps with information that, it's a good way to put it, that coincides with what you're looking for. Now, anyone who is knowledgeable of what FBA stands for and what their rhetoric is, FBA will never claim anyone who came into the country. FBA only claims individuals who can trace their lineage back to slavery, meaning people who were born in the United States who are the direct descendants of slaves. The problem with this, FBA doesn't have any history. When you hear them talk about, I can trace my lineage back to slavery, what you're hearing is that talk that massa has ingrained in them. Their psyche is, as I like to say, self-tethering based upon their definition of a tether. Now, if you haven't heard this, what's a tether? A tether is an insult that FBA uses to define African immigrants, Haitian immigrants, Jamaican immigrants, any type of non-American Black who comes into the country, supposedly riding on the back of foundational Black Americans who built this country, when in fact, foundational Black Americans didn't build anything. No one in history during the course of slavery ever identified as a foundational Black American. That is a term that was just made up within the last, and I'm being liberal about this, in the last 30 years, all right? In the last 30 years, FBA has no history. Instead, what FBA attempts to do is to commit what I call this self-tethering, mental-sidal, ignorant ass move of jumping on the backs of African Americans with distinction. And when I say African Americans with distinctions, I'm speaking of African Americans who are already known in history, in prominence, for being a foundation of what we know as African America in the United States. That is not FBA. But yet, FBA will do anything and everything they can to claim that icons such as Booker T. Washington, Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, Stokely Carmichael, Martin Luther King Jr. They will attempt to say that these individuals are foundational Black Americans when they're not. You know what? Let's do this. Let me give you a direct definition. What is the definition of a tether as defined by foundational Americans? All right, here we go. All right, not what I was looking to do, but you know what? Nothing wrong with adding context. So this is what a tether is. As I said before, this is per FBA culture. Within the context of FBA online discourse, a tether is a derogatory term used primarily for Black individuals of African or Caribbean immigrant descent who are perceived as attaching themselves to the lineage, culture, and struggles of US-born Black descendants of slavery. The term implies that these individuals are roped or chained to the FBA community, often to cosplay as or claim the specific identity of FBA to, in the view of its proponents, being FBA, limit or disrupt the progress of FBA specific advocacy. Now, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. All right, let me check some of the comments. I apologize. Here we go. The thing is, if you always start by asking FBA, are you African descent? The whole concept of claiming, oh, you know what? Let me do this, folks. Let me go ahead and turn on. There we go. Hey, I'm sorry, Beat Active. I missed some of your comments earlier, man. But here, let me go ahead and put this up here now. So let me go ahead and read a few things that Beat Active is dropping. The thing is, if you always start by asking the FBA, are you an African descendant, their whole concept of claiming reparations and taking credits for the real African-American civil rights movement's accomplishments will always crumble for the fact that they always claim to be the me no African descent. And Beat Active, if you're still here, man, yes, you are exactly on topic, or as they like to say, on code. You're speaking exactly the same words that you hear anyone who is for African unity, Pan-African unity, all right? Who speak the same thing, who do not say and speak this nonsense that you hear from FBA. Which means the question will prove who are the official true tethers. And like the title of the video describing, self-tethering. Which means, oops, I read that. Which will let everyone know that FBA is all about reflecting who they are. Which I've been telling for years. All right, so shout out to Beat Active. I couldn't have said it better than myself. I'll continue to speak on it, but Beat Active is locked in on what I'm talking about. FBA has no history. They have zero icons. They have no legacy. But what they do, as I've entitled the show here, the self-tethering ideology of FBA, they have attempted to self-tether themselves to the backs of African Americans with with distinction, who have actually been the ones who have built the foundation through subjugation, through maiming, through lynching, through terror. Nobody in history has ever come out and said that, yes, boss, I was foundational Black American. Nobody has ever been that. This was a concept that was introduced within the last 30 years. So therefore, when I listen to FBA make this statement that, oh, Blacks who subscribe to the Democratic Party, they're still in the Democratic plantation. Or explain this. If you're so gung-ho to state that your lineage can be traced back to slavery, how do you not recognize that just in and of that self, that statement right there actually puts you on Massa's property, AKA his mental plantation? See, FBA doesn't think things through before they make statements. Matter of fact, let's go ahead and go a little bit further. Let's go ahead and take that fact down. So again, shout out, salute, Beat Active, being on point, or as again, like they love to say, to be on code. FBA has no history. This is all pretend. How are you going to be the last ones into the pot, but claiming to be the knowledgeable aspect, and even attempt to define who is or who is not eligible for reparations? You have got to listen to this rhetoric that comes from it. It is severe, it is distinct, and I can't think of any difference between the rhetoric that we hear from FBA from what you hear from the far-right extremists when they talk about, oh, look, they're coming to our country, they're stealing our jobs, they're lowering wages, they're poisoning the blood of the country. This is the same nonsense that you will hear from FBA. The same exact rhetoric. But yet, when you talk to them, and we try and talk about unity amongst the diaspora, oh, the Black diaspora doesn't want unity. Pan-Africanism is dead. It is only dead to those who do not practice it or attempt to ensure its survival. You can't take their words. Again, how are you going to take the words of someone who will make the statement that we have a rich and unique history in America that no one else has experienced. When you have to stop and think about it, that what is it that you think makes you unique from the group of Africans that were dropped off in the Western Hemisphere before we as African descendants were dropped off? Now, I want you to take a moment and be active. Get in on this for a second, man, if this is something that you can relate to, which I'm sure it is. How ignorant is it of Black Americans to look down on African Americans, or should I say African descendants in different countries who came first? Again, we were the last ones to arrive in the Western Hemisphere. So that means that FBA has completely knocked off the list those who landed in Haiti, those who landed in the Caribbean, those who landed in Brazil. We're talking almost 80 to 90 years before Africans were brought to North America, where you had this existence of slave colonies. And, you know, real talk, the only reason why we have these slave colonies in, in Haiti, Jamaica, just these two, we'll stay with those two for right now. The only reason why we even have those is because of the fact that when Columbus landed in Haiti, well, what's not called Haiti, but when he met the first indigenous peoples there, he thought he was in India. Exactly, yeah, completely ignoring things for many, many reasons. But if they ignore the facts, or if they do not speak of those facts, they don't have to worry about contesting them. So they have this compartmentalized, we'll call it what it is, menticide, this self-tethering menticidal ideology that they've wrapped around their necks and then jumped on the backs of African Americans who were actually the folks who struggled and had this experience. I'm not going to say unique, because it's not. There's nothing unique about Africans being enslaved in America as opposed to being enslaved in Haiti, Brazil, and in Jamaica, or throughout the Caribbean. There's no unique experience to speak of. Why is that? Because this unique experience, if anyone is so brash and ignorant to speak of, is nothing more than what Dr. John Henrik Clark called variance. Put a 1 in the chat if you recognize that there is nothing unique about slavery just because the boat dropped you off in a different location. This is that idiocy that I talk about when I address the claims of Foundation of Black Americans. Oh, we're different. We aren't like them others. No, they want to be like us. They want to come to America and pretend to be Black. They're not us. They're not our unique history. We can trace our lineage back to slavery. Okay, how stupid is this? You want to talk poorly about other immigrants when this nation, America, this is nothing but immigrants, right? But solely you want to focus on the Black ones. I haven't heard FBA say anything negative about white immigrants. Although you would probably hear them say, "Oh, you know, that's their problem. We're not dealing with that. But we're just going to talk about the problem we have with the immigrants who come into the country and try and pretend to be us." If you're going to sit here and say that Africans have smoke with African Americans, how is that anyone pretending to be you? But then you'll change the argument around and say, well, they want to talk negative about us. But listen at you, as my grandmother said, listen at you talking negative about them. But more so attempting to claim a level of prominence that is not even yours to have. FBA has no history. FBA has no legacy. They have no icons. Ask anyone from FBA to give you an example of an FBA icon, and I'll damn sure bet you money what they're going to do is attempt to utilize and name an African American of distinction, someone who has already been recognized in African American history as being an icon, because they have none. Holler back if you're picking up what I'm putting down. You know what, let me go ahead and get back to where I was, folks. We can easily run over time with just this conversation alone. So as I was saying, this tether nonsense. How are you going to sit here and call someone a tether when that's exactly what you're doing? Literally, FBA is trying to retroactively pin drop this divisive rhetoric that they put forward back into the middle of slavery, just so they can try and create a history that they never had and never will have, because they have none. No one in the course of history during the time or period of enslavement in America ever identified as a foundational Black American. Another popular statement by Dr. John Henrik Clark. Instead of focusing on where the boat dropped us off, we should all unite and recognize where the boat took us all from. That's the logic that you cannot seem to penetrate inside of the ignorance that they're standing on 10 toes down. So again, the tether definition, it often refers to Black immigrants, their children, anchor babies, or anyone not directly descended from slaves in the United States, yet who presents themselves as a Black American to leverage the cultural and political capital built by that group. FBA, we have to forgive my language here, but FBA hadn't built shit. What political capital are you talking about? You don't exist in history. So how do you build capital that you don't even have the funds for because you never worked for it? Again, for folks who like to claim that they can trace their lineage back to slavery, I fail to see how you can be so anti-immigrant when in fact, the system that you like to trace your lineage back to, a system that was brought to this country, enslaved your ancestors, who you don't like to call your ancestors, enslaved our ancestors, which was put in place by immigrants. Make this make sense, anyone? You're going to criticize immigrants, Blacks primarily, but still the whole base of your commentary is discriminating against immigrants, when in fact the system that you like to trace your lineage through was brought to this country and put in place by immigrants. Holla if you hear me. Again, self-tethering ideology, aka mental-sidal self-tethered ignorance. The term is deliberately disrespectful, often used to suggest that individuals are insincere, misrepresent African descendant culture, or work against the interests of FBA. You're goddamn right. Forgive my language, folks. This is not how I normally talk. But you will not find me or anybody else who is for unity throughout the diaspora speaking in such a manner negatively of our own folks who've endured the same specific slavery. Because again, it is not unique. Dr. Clark had some kids arguing in his class one day when he was teaching college. One kid was African American, another one was Haitian, and another one, I believe, was from the Caribbean. But nonetheless, all three were arguing about a level of distinction. Who was what? And Dr. Clark said, okay, here's what I want you guys to do. I want you guys to go outside and try and catch a cab. Come back tomorrow and let me know what your experience was like. So each of these individuals went outside and tried to catch a cab. When they came back in class the next day, all three of them said they waited for no less than 20 cabs to pass before someone even considered picking them up. Then he asked a young white lady in class, I want you to do the same when you go home today and come back tomorrow and let us know what your experience was like. So the young white girl comes back in class the next day and she said before she even can get her hand up, she had two cabs that had stopped for her. To which his reply was, let that be a lesson to you. And he was talking to the three young Black men specifically. The best Pan-Africanist in the world is a racist because they see you all as being the same. But nigga, give my language. You can't beat that man for what he had to say. You cannot beat that. Facts. So if you would like to see this definition in more context, just type in the word tether or just start right here with what you see on the screen. All right. So we got off on a bit of a tangent there, but it was necessary, I believe, to go ahead and just kind of fill in some of the gaps for, for those of you who have not really been a part of this FBA conversation or even knew anything about it. That's our problem right now. This is the core of our division. We are not keeping up with each other because of the fact that, well, that's them over there. That's got nothing to do with me. But the problem is, yes, it has everything to do with us. When I have FBA folks show up either on my YouTube page or on my TikTok page talking about, and what damn business is it of yours about what FBA does, I make it known to them. It became my damn business the minute that FBA tried to claim history that was not theirs. The minute that you thought that Booker T. Washington, Harriet Tubman, again, Fred Hampton, these well-known African Americans with distinction were affiliated with FBA. Damn if they were. All right, from Beat Active. The FBA is a program it's dedicated, has been created for grooming by shaming all African Americans of being African descendants, by shaming the term African American, by shaming any association of unity with any Afro diaspora or any other minority unity, which will let it be known, will let know is a divide and conquer paid program and shaming for those voting Democrat, which will specifically be the African American women who are the top Democrat voters, which lets you know that it's an anti-Democrat paid program. Now, I'm not going to say it's a paid program, but it is sustained ignorance. Now, a lot of what we see right now in the Black community, a lot of the hostility that we see comes from, we'll say, COINTELPRO, which was launched back in the mid 60s or so, at least back in the civil rights era, to infiltrate Black radical groups, supposedly, to try and turn them against each other. So that's why you hear a lot of folks trying to say that, oh, Martin Luther King, he was a plant, he was an agent, all this type of nonsense that comes out from folks who have got no real grasp of history other than the conspiracy aspect. Now, did COINTELPRO attempt to turn Black organizations looking for unity against each other? Hell yeah. That was the whole purpose. Matter of fact, what a lot of people don't realize here is that after Jim Crow came to an end, there was no way to try and keep Blacks under their thumbs. You couldn't do it because Jim Crow was abolished. 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed. The 1965 Voting Act was passed. And during the course, of those two acts being passed, we saw a swap of ideology amongst the two primary parties in the United States, the Democrats and the Republicans. Now, whether anyone remembers or knows this or not, we're going to veer off for a quick second. Let me go ahead and just lay this groundwork. In the beginning, the Democratic Party were the slave-owning party. Fact. Now, Republicans own slaves also. But the fact of the bigotry and prejudice that you saw exuded the most, it came from the Democratic side of the house at the time. So you had the radical Republicans around 1855, who impressed upon Lincoln, hey, these people need to be free. Now, the other aspect is that the radical Republicans were also Christian. Therefore, those who did not look at the distortion of the Bible, which differs altogether, but still recognize that Africans were still human beings and had the right to freedom as everybody else, impressed upon Lincoln, hey, these folks need to be free. Of course, we know that leads into conflict with the the Southerners, aka Democrats, who built an entire economy on slavery, who weren't about to let slavery go. The Civil War was fought basically on the premise of slavery. It's even written in the paperwork when the states were succeeding, because when I say the states, we're talking about the solid states in the South, made up, I'm just going to name a few here, Texas, Louisiana, Tennessee, Georgia, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. These states that were boldly and completely dependent upon slavery. So don't let anyone try and tell you that, they succeeded because of states' rights. No, it was never because of states' rights. On the paperwork, slavery was the primary reason why they succeeded from the Union. But anyway, be that as it may, folks. So what you have is the Democrats were the slave owners. The Democrats are not the party of KKK, which is this ignorance that Isaac Hayes Jr. and even Nick Cannon shot out here in the last month or so. Absolute stupidity. The KKK was created or was founded in Pulaski, Tennessee by 6 Confederate soldiers who were in no way, shape, or form directly affiliated with the Democratic Party. They may have voted with the slave-owning Democratic Party, but they themselves were not in the Democratic Party. They were not the military wing, being again, the KKK was not the military wing of the Democratic Party. They were a bunch of backwood-ass country boy Confederates who didn't like niggas. Forgive my language. So when the Jim Crow era began, this is how they maintained the control of the newly freed slaves, or the formerly enslaved. We'll say that, the formerly enslaved. That's how they maintained their control, through maiming, through lynching, through terrorism. So when the 1964 Civil Rights Bill was passed, along with the 1965 Voting Rights Act was passed, they lost all of that. So how do you continue to marginalize a section of Americans who were subjugated for a period of 200 plus years? You criminalize the civil rights movement, which is exactly what J. Edgar Hoover had done. By criminalizing the civil rights movement, you can now continue to say that these folks are working in the best or the worst interest against American interests. We weren't even considered to be American. We were considered to be terrorists. But in order to push that narrative, he had to criminalize civil rights in order to say that here's where the problem is. These civil rights seekers. And from there, history was made to whereas you had the predominant amount of folks who got upset because of the fact that Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. Because he signed those pieces of legislation, you had folks who left the Democratic Party for the Republican Party. Now, how does this even happen? Well, when civil rights started becoming an issue, you started having blacks who were leaving the Republican Party, and this goes back to the 1927 Great Flood in Mississippi. You had almost 15,000 square acres that was flooded, put underwater, and pretty much just destroyed. So you had the black community and the African American community living in an encampment. This is around 1927 or so. This is back when, before Herbert Hoover became president. So Herbert Hoover had campaigned that, hey, I'm going to ensure that I do whatever I can for these folks, for these black folks who are losing their land, who are suffering just like everybody else. Made promises. In the end, when he made a promise that he was going to help these African folks if he got into office, he did not do that. So in actuality, what you had happen, for example, the folks who were in that encampment, the white folks were given money for their land. The black farmers, unlike the white farmers, were not given their money. Matter of fact, you had some of the white farmers who were taking the money or receiving the money of the black farmers. Now, add to that, the black farmers were now put in a position whereas once the family started leaving and going back to their homes, even though they were flood destroyed, they made the black farmers stay to help fix the dams. There was even one of the farmers who was shot and killed by one of the white farmers because he refused to do so. Again, look up the 1927 Great Flood of Mississippi, if you're not familiar with that. But starting right there, when Herbert Hoover got into office, a lot of blacks remembered him not coming to the aid as he claimed he would when he was campaigning. Thus started the exodus of blacks from the Republican Party. It was that one moment in time right there, well, not the specific moment, but that one particular moment that started the movement of blacks from the Republican Party. Because remember, prior to the Civil War, it was the Republicans who were fighting for the rights of slaves. But again, this moment, 1927, all that started to change. So by the time we get to the 1964 presidential election season, you had Strom Thurmond, who was the leader of a quick and running, came and gone, put it this way, Dixiecrats, who attempted to get the nomination, but did not. But he was one of those, you call Southern Democrats, who were part of the Democratic Party, who still was an advocate for segregation. A strong advocate. So by the time, again, 1964-65 comes around, these two bills are passed. Once they come and go through, you have Democrats who are segregation supporting Democrats leave for the Republican Party. And you have Republicans who are for civil rights and what it stands for, African Americans, who leave the Republican Party and go to the Democratic Party. But if you were to have this conversation right now with FBA or even conservatives, they will swear to you up and down that the Democratic Party of today is the same party it was back at the end of the Civil War, and vice versa. All right, Beat Right. I'm sorry, man. I think you dropped some more knowledge down here, but I'm hoping people are looking at the bottom corner of the screen and you can see here that the comments are turned on. So if I happen to miss anything, please make sure that you check the comments on the side here. There is no way that it's not a paid grooming sharing program, because the same copy and paste energy, concepts, hating points, attracting points, and same exact focus. Yeah, it's the exact same focus. Now, if you want to call it, if you have to call it a paid program, then yes, you have folks who are actively campaigning inside of conservative circles, to include also amongst blacks themselves, or should I say FBA conservative-minded supporting blacks. Now, if we had to put it down that way, then I would say yes, if that helps make the argument that you're stating. Now, overall, it is not some backrooms master thing that is being done or being said, but it is still a factor that we know that FBA has no history, and that this divisive rhetoric they speak of being the builders of this country, is a damn lie, because the builders of this country were the African American descendants who were should I say descended from enslaved Africans. Because as I said before, there was no one during the period of slavery who identified as a foundational Black American. What all four of y'all do? If you're asking what we're doing, what's going on, Leroy, we're having a discussion about the self-tethering ideology of FBA. So let me go ahead and put back up on the screen here. There we go. So as I said before, let's take that. So again, when we look at FBA, FBA will not claim anything to do with Africa. So as I said here, when they claim that FBA often traces their history to the arrival of enslaved people in Virginia in 1619, that is a lie. All right. They want nothing to do with anything that is called Africa, because our history started here in America. We got nothing to do with Africa. That's separate from us. The specific term foundational Black American was coined in the late 2010s, roughly 2019. But again, if we're not considering ADOS in here as well, again, I'll give it 30 years just to be sporting, to distinguish descendants of U.S. chattel slavery from recent African Caribbean immigrants, largely popularized by figures like Tariq Nasheed and movements like ADOS. All right, so this is the beginning of this idiocy. FBA has no history. Any history that you hear claimed by FBA is actually the history of African Americans with distinction. The actual folks responsible for the foundation that we have for Black history or African American history in America. No one called FBA ever worked in the fields of slavery? I'll give more on that a little bit later. All right, be active, stay active. The FBA were around 9 years ago. So how does FBA build America and accomplish anything in the civil rights movements when the FBA is about 9 years old? You're damn right. Speak on it. How do you claim to have built anything when you just come into existence within the last 30 years? You can't. But what do? By your own volition here, by your own statement, you tether yourselves to the backs of the people who actually were responsible for the work. Again, African American descendants derived from enslaved Africans taken from Africa. Nobody named FBA or associated or affiliated with FBA ever worked a day in their lives as a slave. Shout out to Beat Active. And you know what? There's nothing more to say on this tab here. We know who our people are, who are responsible for what we have as far as history in America. And it's damn sure not FBA. So let's go ahead and get here to the video portion. So that being said, let me go ahead and stop the music for right now. All right, so we're going to shut the music off. I'm going to drop here a couple of the video slides that I've got out here on TikTok. There we go. Here we go. All right, so let me know if you can hear this, folks. Anyone in the background, all right? So fair use, fair use. Now, from here on out, I'm just going to go ahead and share the whole screen. Oh, one more comment before we drop it. All right, beat right. Hey, there we go. So y'all saying, whoops, just a minute. So y'all saying FBA is an organization, vote blue? No, we're not saying FBA is an organization. We're saying that it is a self-tethering ideology. Definitely saying vote blue because there are only two options. Because if you vote the other color, you're voting for folks who have called slavery divisive. That is called Black history, or excuse me, it's called Black history divisive. That is called Black history revisionist. Oh. There we go. Oh yeah, I'm not playing the video yet, Beat Active. Please slow down with citing all the historical artifacts, documents, and archaeological reference. Some of us just want to hear sweet sounding lies. Shout out to you, D Digital Production Group, man. Glad to have you here. No Democrats are racist. You know what, Leroy, you're going to have to use punctuation here, man, because I can't really decipher what it is you're trying to say. Now, this is not trying to be insulting, brother, but I need you to communicate in a way that I can properly assess what you're saying, because I don't want to misrepresent what you're saying or anyone else for that matter. All right, so let me go ahead and bring this up here. So again, let me know if you cannot hear this well or at all right? Appreciate you all who've taken the time to let me know that you appreciate the information that I'm putting out here regarding this foundation of Black ignorance that we're finding that is more or less undermining the establishment of history that African Americans have already put in place throughout history. As I said numerous times before, FBA has no history, and I will continue to say this. More important than what we need to make sure that we let it be known is when we hear ignorance such as how's this any of your damn business, you tell them promptly, you tell them succinctly. It became my business the minute you guys attempted to usurp history that is already put in place by African Americans with distinction, those who've already come before you, that have existed in this country decades, centuries before the concept of FBA or ADOS was even formulated. And to think you guys would be as brash as you are to come along with a history less than 30 years total between ADOS or FBA. Give it more, a little bit less, but it doesn't really matter, because the thing is that the history that you guys like to speak of is not yours. It does not belong to you. It never was yours. But yet you attempt to walk in and take 240 some odd years of history that has already been established, that is already known as African American history, and try to displace it with this anti-immigrant, especially Black immigrant rhetoric that you guys speak of, with tactics and speech that is similar to far-right extremism, which can definitely be linked to the speech and the activity that you guys portray. Now, take it any way you want to, but I've already said it and I'll say it again. You find one prominent icon in FBA culture that has not been mentioned and recognized in African-American history as an African-American with distinction. You can't do it. You never will be able to, because you have no one that would be considered legacy other than the legacy you're trying to usurp from African-American history. I said this in another video, and I'll say it here as well. I can't think of anything more ignorant than people claiming that they can trace their lineage back to an institution that was brought to this country and implemented by immigrants. This is that mental, self-tethering incompetence that is manifested inside your circles. And those of us who are African descendants of Africans who were brought to America will not stand for it. If you like it, let me know, share it if you do, and subscribe if this is something you're looking for. All right, holla if you hear me. Put a 1 in the chat. All right, I'll say it again. Put a 1 in the chat if you recognize that I told no lies. Put a 2 in the chat if you think I lied all the way through and you believe that FBA built the foundation of America and not African Americans with distinction. Hey, I don't think I can get any clearer than that. What y'all say? I don't think I can be any clearer than what I've just spoken. FBA has no history. Zero. Whatever history they claim to have, it was our history. It's always been our history. I gotta go, but we, like y'all all now, were immigrants in Africa when the slave trade started, and y'all sold us outsiders, not your own families. Y'all ain't monsters, are you? All right, so this, again, I'll say right now, teachers, if you got to go, but make sure you come back and understand that we were not immigrants in Africa. We never were. We were always in Africa. Our history begins in Africa. If anyone were immigrants in Africa, it would have been the Arabs that came from the Arabian Peninsula, who enslaved Africans around the 8th century, which is 711 AD, or actually around the 7th century. It would have been the arrival of Alexander the Great in 330 BC, after displacing the Phoenicians and then becoming the new enslavers. But Africans have always been there. As a matter of fact, we were the ones who were taken from our country, and you missed this. We were sent to, or should I say trafficked, in the Arabian Peninsula, long before even the Spanish started trafficking us. Now, here's something that a lot of people don't know, and I think maybe T Digital may be missing this, but it was in 1455, Pope Nicholas V sanctioned slavery, aka the enslavement of Africans, therefore taking us from our lands so the resources of Africa could be conquered. So again, blacks falling on the ground, talking about, oh, Jesus, oh, my Lord, praising an institution that actually puts you in chains. I won't tell anyone anything that I can't justify. 1455, Pope Nicholas V. The Roman Catholic Church sanctioned slavery. All right, going back to what I said earlier, we got a 1 from Beat Active right now who knows a little bit more than our FBI folks like myself about our actual history. Probably knows a lot more. Shout out. Be active. Thanks for representing. Want to cease maps from the 1600s, the kingdom of Judah, exactly where the slave coast was. I know it is a historical artifact and all, so cool if you don't. Hey, like I said here, folks, and again, T-Digital, I have no issue with whatever it is that you want to present or feel that you need to present, but the facts don't change. We were brought from Africa. Now, if you are someone who believes in the Bible, then that's a problem already. Now, I've said this before. Two of the things. All right, yeah. Swing back when you can, man. Thanks for signing in. Two of the things that I find to have been the most detrimental to Black culture. Number one, FBA. But even before FBA came along, what I consider to be the most detrimental has been Christianity. Because Christianity in and of itself was nothing more than African spirituality that was extracted from Africa, chopped, screwed, mixed or remixed, and presented back to us in a different form. You see, there was spirituality that Africa was known for prior to the arrival of the Europeans, prior to the arrival of the Arabs, prior to any type of colonization. But if you aren't aware of that, then you will accept anything that has been put in place and allowed to stand per, as I said before, the scientific racism that became known through the 18th and 19th century that intentionally suppressed African prominence. Now, I've done some shows on this before. Now, what I'll probably do after this show is I'll put some links in there that will take you back to that so you can see these things that have been previously discussed if you're unfamiliar with that. All right, so getting on along here, I thought this would be, this is not the one with the comments, but what I really want you guys to see here are some of the comments that come, some of the comments that come from these folks of FBA Logic. But Mom called him off the hook. I'm back already. I'll catch up. All right. So let's go into this a little bit more. All right. Here's another video that I've dropped here recently. All right. Check it out. Go ahead and get it done. You've heard me speak more than once about the foundational Black American idiocy that we find ourselves mixed up in as Black Americans. So when I listen to someone preach about foundational Black Americans, I have to remind myself that what I'm hearing is someone speaking the training from their ancestral slave father. All right, what's going on, everybody? You know who this is. You know what we do. So
and I want to push that with the new members of Congress, saying all over.
Sorry about that, folks. Let's try this once again. So let me know if you can hear this or not. You've heard me speak more than once about the foundational Black American idiocy that we find ourselves mixed up in as Black Americans. So when I listen to someone preach about foundational Black Americans, I have to remind myself that what I'm hearing is someone speaking the training from their ancestral slave father. That's literally what it is. Slave training that is still ingrained in them, that is being executed by them, to whereas you don't have to worry about master being around because they taught the teachings and they taught the teachings well. Think about this. Who in their right mind would be proud to say that I can trace my lineage back to the slave master's quarters and a bullwhip? These same people attempt to, what I'll say is, usurp prominent Black Americans who've already set their mark in American history by claiming Thurgood Marshall, Shirley Chisholm, just to name a few names, are foundational Black Americans. No, they are not foundational Black Americans. They are African Americans who have proven themselves and have shown prominence that is recognized in the history of African Americans in the United States. So we've got to stop this nonsense that we keep hearing from these folks. All they're doing is breeding the same type of disparaging commentary and separation in us that you can get from anybody on Fox News, any Black conservative. I refer to that as them being Black conservative, comfort under plantation buffoonery. Remember where it is that we came from, because to hear someone say that I have nothing to do with Africa is the idiocy that you would listen to and think to yourself, what type of fool thinks that 100 comes before 50? That the cart comes before the horse? That your mother had nothing to do with your existence? Which is pretty much what you're saying if you don't think that you came from Africa by way of your African ancestors. Never let it be said, folks, regardless of where the boat may have dropped us all off in our different sections of the world, we all were kidnapped and taken from the same place, Africa. If you like it, let me know, share it if you do, and subscribe if this is something you're looking for. All right, I apologize if there was any background noise if I didn't mute as I should have. So T. Digital, you said, do you mean the maps from the 1600s and prior? Or should I say, we were brought from Africa, but Africa was not our home. So I am willing to entertain that information to see what this is about, again, at another date and time when you're available to present such information, man. I am interested to see where this would go. No doubt. But you know what, folks? There was something I forgot to do. Let me do this for a moment. And I try to do this before each and every show now because it helps stabilize and center the conversation or the conversations that are going to be had. So I got this from Dr. Ray Hagan. So I want everyone, if you're watching, whether this is replay or actively right now, just do this. Put this up. This is going to be our circle, all right? So repeat after me or just listen to what I recite. Inside this circle are my anecdotal, lived experiences and exposures that I base my life on. Just because John says something doesn't mean that I am an idiot or he's a liar. It just means I am unfamiliar with the conversation being had. Now, that not only is for you, but it's for me as well. So anytime there's something you hear that you have not heard or you're familiar with, try not to be quick to disrupt or discuss this as being, or dismiss this as being ignorance. All right, let's try not to do that. What we want to do is take in mind and take in consideration that this could be information that we're not familiar with, that may have validity or might not be. But before we completely dismiss it, hear it out, take a look at it, make an assessment. And based upon empirical evidence or information that surrounds what's being presented, it will be easier to deduce whether or not, if we're looking at something that can be considered fact or fiction. Has this brother been to Africa? I can't really say whether or not T. Digital has been to Africa or not. I can't say that I have not been to Africa. Now, I have been to 6 different continents, Africa not being one of them, but I'm looking to go to Africa next year myself. But my having been in England, having been through Spain, having been through Germany, having been through Croatia, having been through Italy, having been to Korea, having been to Kuwait, having been to Qatar, all these places that I've been to and come across Africans, the experience is still pretty much the same. There's a level of unity that I've seen in every location that I've been to. Now, yes, you're going to have one or two who may have something negative to say about blacks, You may have some who have something negative to say about others, but in the end, it is not made out to be this intellectual deficit that you find from FBA criticizing that diaspora as a whole. Oops. 17th century European maps, particularly from Dutch and French cartographers, often labeled the region of the slave coast in West Africa, modern day Benin Togo, as the Kingdom of Judah. Now, here's the problem right there when you mention the Dutch and the French. These are the main folks who are responsible for our enslavement as a people. And because of this enslavement as a people, not to mention their belief in using the Bible to justify slavery, you will have information to whereas folks will even try and say that Egypt is not in Africa. So as a result of these folks that you wanted to bring up right now, T Digital, this is the racial, or should I say the scientific racism that I spoke of earlier in the show that was used to suppress and subjugate African prominence in history. Exactly. FBA proclaim themselves me no African descendant, the me original indigenous, or the me ethnogenesis. Supposedly a completely new race that doesn't include African ancestry, while they want to claim African descendants, reparations, civil rights accomplishments. Now, I've been to Africa several times, all over the world, U.S. Navy. Dad was in the Army, did 3 world tours with bands as a piano player. I'm all over it. Okay, so I'll just let you know, since we're making comparisons, I was a dependent also. 20 years followed my father around. Then I joined the military as well for 20 years myself. Traveled all over as well. So I've got experiences that I can relay here also. So let's try and kill the one-upsmanship, and let's stay on target here, which is the fact that, again, regardless of whatever maps that we talk about, which again, I said I'm willing to entertain, but the history has already been shown and demonstrated. If you do not allow yourself to be misled by the Bible, we know for a scientific fact that Africans, the people who exist on that continent, originally called, I want to say Aquabuela, are from Africa. Why aren't Africans promoting Pan-Africanism? What makes you think Africans are not promoting Pan-Africanism? Africans have always promoted Pan-Africanism. Now, just like any other folks who have family members in the house, you may have a dispute amongst folks. You may have those who say, well, even though you live in this house, I don't care what you have to say, but still, I recognize what it is that you are saying. And inside of Africa, Pan-Africanism is promoted. It's only those who subscribe to the FBA ideology, who like to say Pan-Africanism is not promoted in order to make the narrative that they speak, which is divisive rhetoric, front and stage center of their divisive rhetoric. But we'll be getting to that here shortly. I don't want to leave anyone in the lurch and not think that I've got nothing else to provide here. Oh, there's more that's going to be here at the end shortly. All right, let's keep on moving here, folks. All right, so we know here, Tariq, for those of who've been around for a general amount of time, we know that Tariq has been one of the primary folks, along with Dr. Claude Anderson, promoting this FBA ideology. As I said before, FBA has no history in America, none. The history that they like to speak of is that of African-American descendants who are descended from enslaved Africans who themselves were captured and brought over here on slave ships from Africa. No one during the period of slavery ever identified as a foundational Black American, because the concept has only been around for less than 30 years, but promoted more within the last, let's say, 10 or 15. Now, I'm not going to read all the way through this because many folks who are part of the conversation know who Tariq Nasheed is. For those of you who do not, by all means, here's something you can pick up on this wiki that'll give you the background of where this all started really gaining traction. Now, Tariq has been seen as a grifter, having gone from being a rapper, having been from producing documentaries, tried a little bit to handle comedy. He's been all over the place. but he is primarily one of the folks that you see at the head of the pack of this movement. I'm not going to call it an organization. I've said so in the past. If I have, that was an error. It is not a fully qualified organization, but it is an ideology which has about maybe 42% or so of blacks who lack a significant amount of history who believe this. It ain't one-upsmanship. I was asked had I been to Africa. Let's calm down. No one spun up, bro. No one is spun up. So please miss me with that type of rhetoric. All right. Come here and enjoy the show and just listen to the information. As I said before, if there's anything that I'm saying, put your circle up. So as I said here, Tariq is one of the folks who's really pushing the concept of foundational Black America. Okay, now start with the Pan-Africanism by Africans, or we will look at Africa. Yes, we can look at Africa. Again, we always will look for the division. No one talks about the division that's inside the United States. Notice we don't hear FBA talking about the divisions, instead talking about how they've brought everyone together. So by us talking about Africa, we know that there is dissension in Africa. We know that there's discourse. However, regardless of the discourse, you and I both know Africa is a large country. All right, that is a large place made of different states inside of that. Africa is just a continent, of course. Let me correct it. It's a continent that is made up of many countries on the inside. But for us to sit here and try and say that every last country is against each other is nowhere anywhere near the truth. And here, as I mentioned earlier, folks, delineation. Notice how Leroy is using it wrong again. It's not about division. Delineation is specified. It is not about division. That would be a totally different word. So when you hear FBA use delineation, like Leroy has done, they've used it in the wrong context. And here we go. Look at God. And as I said before, one of the things that is hard to do here is when you have blacks who are religiously indoctrinated. And when I say religiously indoctrinated, we're talking about now folks you literally can't have a conversation with about anything practical because they truly believe that God exists. There's no God, there's no Jesus. As I've said in previous shows, any and everything about Christianity is nothing more than stories taken from other cultures that have been either distorted or remade to appear as if it is an original work by Christians. No, bro, I am not a hater. I am actually a pragmatic humanist. I'm a realist. And also I'm someone who's driven by facts as being a researcher. So there's nothing for me to hate about. No, there's only nothing but the facts that I'll present, which again, I'm not going to put anything up here that I can't justify. So as I said, when you start dealing with folks who believe that biblical history is the actual account of actual history, we start having problems. So I'm going to say this one thing right now, just to show you how bad the Christian-minded blacks are when it comes to math. In 4004 BCE, or roughly 4004 BCE, it is believed to be the creation of the earth on the 23rd of October. And guess what day that was? Supposedly, that day was a Sunday. And who came up with this concept? It was an Irish cleric by the name of James Ussher. This is roughly around, I want to say, the 17th century. So again, James Ussher, through perusing of the Bible, or intense perusing, we'll say, he believed that he had figured out that 4004 BCE was the actual date of creation of the earth. But the problem with that, in 8000 BCE, you had Africans living along the Nile. Again, this is recorded in history. In 8000 BCE in China, they were just then learning how to cultivate rice. In 8000 BCE in Japan, they were coming from being nomads and settling down to being sedentary to build the societies that you see right now. All of this was in 8000 BCE. So with that being said, life being recorded in historical, all right, actual recorded history as existing, and the earth supposedly coming to be by James Ussher in 4004 BCE, how in the hell is Adam the first man? He wasn't. Then speak on positive things with Pan-Africans. I'm not Tariq. No, you're not Tariq, but if you think I'm a hater because of the fact that Pan-Africanism is a dead art, then just stand by here. I've got something that's always in place for that. I don't come unprepared. Africans are in Africa, right? Where they are doing Africanism, right? Where they're doing, I'm not sure what you mean by where they're doing Africanism, but yes, they're Africans who live in Africa. Right. We can say that without any type of conflict. The conflict that comes into place is when we start using the Bible to try and give a description, not even an accurate description, but to give an idea of what Africa was. Understand something. Noah, Moses, Peter, Paul, John, none of these guys ever existed. But everyone will attempt to try and use as a justification to speak of Africa or where everything came from. Each African country has internal tribes that are great, that are against each other. Thanks, bro. Talk with no proof. Fun to hear before going out on Saturday night. Please, by all means, go out on Saturday night, take your circle. The fact that people fight with each other doesn't mean that it's the entire continent. It's called context that needs to be added to the conversation, not a distinction to help a failed argument. But I appreciate you stopping by, TJ. If you can't show solidarity against the motherland, you ain't winning. But here's the thing. If you can't show that there isn't any solidarity at all, you misspeak your statements. But again, I've got something for you here, Leroy, because clearly you're that FBA here that we're going to talk about in a moment. When I speak of not having a solid foundation of history as it exists, but simply looking for points of contention to make that have no balance, that have no ground floor. Again, we don't do church, we do the Most High. You better ask somebody. No need to ask, because the Most High doesn't exist. But if you feel that it does and it gives you comfort, then you believe in that. Understand it is not a universal acknowledgement of the Most High. All right, so moving on. Our supporters of foundational Black American ideology, or what I meant to say was the supporters of foundational Black American ideology show a lack of Black American history. Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. Yes, they do. Oh, wait. Africa is all about white Jesus. Actually, no, it is not. But I will say that Ghana is probably where you find the biggest amount of Jesus freaks. I remember in a lecture, it was either Dr. Ben or it may have, I think it was probably Dr. Clark, who mentioned that how in certain areas where Africans have completely committed to the worship of a blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus. All right, now we'll then add Nigeria, but Ghana, yes. Good luck, sir. If anyone tries for future documentation, they got big problems. All righty, you have none. Appreciate you stopping by, and make sure that you do get in on some future shows, man. Maybe I may have to bring you up so we can have conversations. So, as it stands, supporters of foundational Black American ideology are often criticized for exhibiting a limited, sometimes inaccurate understanding of Black history by focusing narrowly on descendants of U.S. chattel slavery, argue the counterbalances and other critics. While proponents argue they are protecting a unique lineage and advocating for targeted reparations, opponents argue this approach erases African history, separates the American experience from the broader diaspora, and divides the Black community. And that's exactly what FBA logic does. FBA logic seems to believe that all of a sudden our existence in America just happened to come about. Oh, we don't have anything to do with Africa. Oh no, if you can't trace your lineage back to slavery, you aren't entitled to reparations. But truth of the matter is that FBA is not entitled to reparations. Why? Because they just came into existence 20 or 30 years ago at best. Nobody in slavery during that period of time identified as foundational Black American. Only people who identified as Negro, as colored, as African, or even we were called Afro-American. Believe it or not, the term African American was coined in 1782, or was it 1789? But nonetheless, Jesse Jackson did not coin the term African American. I'm here because it's entertainment, not edutainment. Well, Leroy, I'm here because I bring education. That's what my platform has always been about and what it will be about. I'm here to educate, not entertain. As I said before, if you have an issue with what's being said, make sure you put your circle up. No FBA member cards exist. You're right, because FBA has nothing that they could put on cards if they decided to, because you have no history. None. The history that you consider to be unique is nothing more than the history of African Americans with distinction. African Americans who have already come before and found their place in history. So here you go, Leroy. Give me one foundational Black American, one, just one, that you can name who is prominent, but who has not already been identified in American history as an African American with distinction. All right? Name me one. All Pan-Africans are here in America. Oh, bro. You're so disillusioned, but that's all right. Again, my job here is not to convince you. More so, my job right now is to illustrate people like you. And you are doing a damn good job of it. So please keep professing what it is that your ideology supporting FBA is all about. I need you to do that to give credence to what it is that I'm discussing tonight. Lineage versus history. FBA supporters argue that Black identity in the US begins with slavery, not Africa, emphasizing a distinct culture, which again, I'll say, and forgive my language, bullshit. Trying to say that your history in the US begins with slavery is like, as I said before, saying to your mother, or actually slapping your Black mother with an open hand, bitch, I don't come from you. Massa's got me. Again, how do you think that you are going to come to existence without being born of your mother? How do you think this FBA foolery even exists without Africans having been kidnapped and brought to America? But you guys just roll right over that, don't you? Again, I want you to keep speaking out, Leroy. I want you to validate everything that I'm saying right now. I'm not here to contest anyone. I'm here to provide the proof, to provide the evidence to where anyone can go back and see for themselves. Please keep commenting, man. I want you to be heard. Reparations focus. The movement focuses on reparations for descendants of American slavery, ADOS, and FBA. Critics suggest this approach overlooks the contributions of Afro-Caribbeans and African immigrants in the American fight for justice. And yes, it does. Again, the whole concept of FBA is discriminatory because you're talking about trying to find a way to exclude, or this is them using the misuse of the word delineate. No, you're not delineating. All right. You're literally excluding. You're cutting out folks who were here before you, who are responsible for the history that you are trying to take and own as FBA. Y'all should fight for Caribbeans and South Americans to be called Africans. Oh, shit. So again, once more, Leroy has proved my argument here. Now, did I not say that Africans are all over? That Africans who were brought last to the Western Hemisphere seem to be the ones talking the loudest about who is entitled to what. There were Africans who were in Haiti, Africans who were in Caribbean, Africans who were in Brazil before a single African set foot on North America. And when they did set foot on North America, science does not give any credence to that. Yes, we visited from Africa, we visited, as in Africans, visited North America, Mexico specifically, 200 years before Columbus. Now, if anyone is not familiar with Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, he wrote a book called They Came Before Columbus. Now, I'm still going through it right now, but I have been in discussions and commentary about the book from previous websites, here and there on a panel or two. But taking the time to fully read through it brings more, brings more context to the conversation. The Olmec heads that they found in a dig, I want to say it was around 1973, 74. But when they found these heads, they resembled that of Africans. Even the story that came back where they talked about doing trade with these dark-skinned folks, they talked about the fine clothing that they wore, or the nice-looking clothing. We'll say that. I don't know if they spoke fine, but we'll say the nice clothing that they wore. And one of the things they spoke of in this description given was that they were carrying gold-tipped spears. Now, when you looked at that and you took it back to Africa and you try and figure out who were these people who had visited North America before Columbus got there, you find that in the Guinea region of Africa, they are known to adorn or to have gold-tipped spears. So therefore was the tie that was found when they talked about who are these dark-skinned folks who traveled there? Who were these heads reflective of? They're reflective of the Africans who had traveled by boat, made it to North America, but did not stay because, again, they were explorers. We'll drop it off right there. So again, as I said, here are supporters of foundational Black American ideology showing a lack of Black American history. The answer is yes. All you have to do is just listen to what's coming out of Leroy's, or I shouldn't say listen, but view what he is typing. Now let's go ahead. Let's keep on moving, folks. Now, getting on the topic of FBA not having a good account of their own American history, I'm going to show this to you. I'm going to play this, and then I'm going to show you some of the comments that I received. All right, so go ahead and let's have a listen.
Let's go ahead and do the damn thing. FBA really did not give any consideration to the ideology that they're putting out into the ether. And I really stop and think if this was just something that was put out in a rush just to say that, oh, well, we're going to get reparations for Black folks. But the way they're going about it is wrong and makes no sense. And again, is born out of discrimination. But we'll get into that later. What I'm going to tell you right now, first and foremost, is that FBA has no history in America. So every time you hear them talking about we have a rich and unique history, no, you do not. You do not have a rich and unique history. This is what I call a self-tethering move. Now, as you already know, if you don't, when FBA calls Blacks, even African-American Blacks like myself, tethers, they're trying to say that we are riding the backs of foundational Black Americans who more or less established America. They're trying to say that we're riding their accomplishments. But the problem is that they have, again, no accomplishments that have ever been achieved by FBA. Reason being, FBA is riding the backs of African Americans with distinction who are already recognized in history for their prominence before the concept of FBA ever came to exist. So again, this is a self-tethering move by claiming a unique history when in fact you're trying to usurp the history of African Americans that have already come before you. Find the lie in my statement if you can. The next thing is this misuse of the word delineate. Delineate in and of itself means to create structure and accuracy, a means of providing a vivid description. But the minute you start saying, well, we want to delineate from, you're not using the word in the proper context. Now you're talking about separation. And that's literally what they want. And when they talk about separation, what they fail to realize is that separation is a Eurocentric concept. I watched the show the other day called On the Shoulders of Giants, and I realized what this brother was trying to do. He was trying to fuse FBA with Pan-Africanism, which we know it doesn't work. It doesn't even work that way, because by virtue of FBA and its anti-immigrant rhetoric, it disqualifies any possibility of being seen as a unifying factor, which is what Pan-Africanism is for the diaspora. All right, so messing with this nonsense. Furthermore, when you are attempting to use delineate, which they're using wrong, you are actually using the word separate. And we already know that separate is a Eurocentric concept. Think about it. Separation of church and state, separation of duties, separate drinking fountains, separate neighborhoods, separate schools. Are you picking up what I'm putting down, people? So therefore, when you want to delineate, no, you're not trying to be specific. You're trying to separate, which feeds into racism. So keep that in mind the next time you hear this nonsense of delineating or we have a rich and unique history. As I've said before, FBA has no history. If you feel that you can trace your history back to subjugation, then all you're doing is just proving once and for all that your lineage is nothing more than a scarred ass end concept left by the strong and versatile tongue of a bullwhip. Enough said. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for.
I don't need to repeat what I said, because I said what I said and I stand on it. FBA has no history. They have no lineage that they speak of, other than the lineage of self-tethering menticide that they're leaving in our presence. That clearly is reflected in the conversations that they type inside of our chats. Again, let me go back to this. Hey, Leroy, as I said, name me one prominent FBA icon that is not already recognized in African American history as an African descendant, all right, as an African American with distinction. Name me just one, all right? Give me one FBA icon that is not already known in history as being African American and prominent in helping lay the foundation that African American history is built upon. Give me one. All right, so he can't, but still, I just want to entertain this. I want to see what he comes up with. Rufus Moose Knuckles, some dumb shit like that. Again, forgive my language, but no, FBA can't give you any icons, because any icons they attempt to give you are going to be our icons. And when I say our icons, I'm talking about FBA, or should I say African Americans who are already known in history. That's who I'm talking about. Give me one, Leroy, just one. So let me go ahead and also show you this nonsense that I also get inside of my chat here on TikTok. No jab for me. FBA are tethering themselves onto African American achievements. Hey, I didn't say this. Again, by the definition of tethering, that is exactly what FBA is doing, is it not? I swear they did not think this shit out before they started making comments. So I put this out here, and this is what I got from this cat named Davy Young. FBA, Black American, African American is the same lineage. And you know what? He is absolutely right. We are of the same lineage. However, African American descendants, we acknowledge our African descendancy. We acknowledge our heritage and our culture, whereas FBA does not. So I replied, yet only those who represent our African American heritage and realize our ancestral homeland is Africa acknowledge that fact. But Davy boy here, no. He does not recognize that fact, would not. Matter of fact, let's go a little bit further. My grandparents never called themselves African American. That term was coined by Jesse Jackson. Oh shit. Now, did I not just tell you that that FBA has no knowledge of African American history? All they have is foundational Black rhetoric. I can think of many things when I hear the term FBA. Fanatical Black arrogance, failed Black awareness, foundational Black assery. All right, but let's not go down that road. But those are the things that come to mind when I think of FBA, and I listen to some of the most ignorant stuff that comes out of their mouths. But we won't get to that. Now, again, let's go back to this comment where Davey here said that FBA and Black American, African American is the same lineage. Now, No Jab for Me came back and said it isn't. FBA is a xenophobic movement, an anti-Black immigration movement that does not apply to all 48 million Black Americans. And he is absolutely correct regarding this part of it. Now, I made statement down below to clarify what No Jab for Me was stating, but I replied back. I think, yeah, this is back to Davey. I have no issue telling you you're wrong, sport. For folks who claim to have a rich history, y'all don't seem to know shit about anything. And I stand on that. The rhetoric that I hear that comes from FBA folks is similar to the same thing you hear from white conservative neo-Christians who support Christian nationalism and the Seven Mountains Mandate, which I've spoken of previously. And I'll probably say a little bit about it here because that may be an intro to one of the future shows coming up here. So then, of course, I had to reply back to No Jab. I said, you are 100% correct. FBA is a xenophobic movement, no argument there. But you and I stand on the side of history that needs to educate the fallen consciousness that Davey and his FBA brethren represent. Regardless of the ignorance that FBA doesn't accept their lineage, we, Pan-African consciousness, know for a fact FBA is a part of ours because the facts show if you trace the lineage of the institution of chattel slavery, even if it did not originate in America. Think about it. Chattel slavery did not originate in North America. So why does FBA brag about having a lineage by an institution that is foreign to America? For people to claim such a rich history, FBA doesn't seem to know shit about it. And again, I stand on that. How are you going to brag about tracing your lineage when the institution that you're tracing your lineage through, that enslaved you, that brought you to this region, this country, this continent by force, was an institution that was installed by immigrants? As I said before, when I hear this thing of I can trace my lineage back to slavery, how are you going to sit here and call people who support the Democratic Party still being on the plantation when the very thing that you trace your lineage back to, that you call your claim to fame, is the perfect example of you standing on masses' property, aka plantation, whether it be mental nowadays? Miss me with this nonsense. So I go back and I also give an explanation here. I may need to go ahead and leave this link as well about where the expression of African American came from. Excuse me. Sometimes our people can be so ignorant, it hurts to respond. But since many of FBA didn't get a good education in their youth, I guess I'll have to get them all schooled up right about now. Point blank, Jesse Jackson did not coin the term African American. Here's some education about African Americans our FBA brethren clearly lack. Now, this is an inquiry that I did, a scholarly inquiry, to pull down the aspect of where was the phrase African American coined. The term African American came to be known in 1782 by a newspaper pamphlet advertising a sermon to be given by a Black man that was called A Sermon on the Capture of Lord Cornwallis. It was published in Philadelphia and credited to an African American. Notice, credited to an African American. I did not make this up. Jesse Jackson did not make this up. This was something that was already written in history. So if you wanted to figure this out for yourself, folks, just type when did the term African American come to be known, and then put in 1782 newspaper pamphlet, and then put specifically a sermon. Well, here we go, a sermon on the capture of Lord Cornwallis, and you'll get the same information that I'm sharing with you right now. Here's some other ish. As I said, I'm damn well sure FBA clearly doesn't know, based on how their tongues are wagging right about now regarding how African descendants and ancestors are referred to. So then, from this same inquiry, I also got the following information. Africo-American. Now, how many of you have ever heard this term? Africo-American. Now, these are terms that went to the wayside, but still, this is what we were known well before the concept of FBA and ADOS was created just recently. Africo-American, attested as a noun in 1817 and an adjective in 1826. Afro-American, first used in 1853. Now, here's one that none of us have heard. I wasn't even aware of this. Afro-American, recorded in use by 1921. Negro, colored, common in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Black, popularized in the 1960s and 70s and commonly used in short. Jesse Jackson brought back the expression, being it had been replaced by the aforementioned examples above. He did not coin the phrase. And again, I ended with failed Black awareness is undefeated. So I want to make sure that we see this here. In short, Jesse Jackson brought back the expression. He did not coin the expression African American. He simply brought it back into mainstream culture. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. Again, this is just information that I pulled, that I put inside of a response that you can easily pull for yourself if you go to your favorite web browser. All right, so if we take note, Leroy Brown has left the building. And why do you think Leroy left? I can think of many reasons, but I'm going to say this one thing right here, that regardless of if he'd stayed or if he'd left, he or no one from FBA can validate. As I said, Leroy, name me one prominent FBA icon that is not already recognized in African American history. Matter of fact, anybody in FBA, give me one prominent FBA icon. One, that's all you have to do, who is not already known in African American history. You can't do it. So what I have here is a list of individuals born outside of America who've been prominent in promoting African history, heritage, but for the most part, looking for universal solidarity in the diaspora. Now, one of the folks, if I didn't mention today, Sheikh Anta Diop. Now, he was I won't say he was the first, but he was someone who went to bat for African history that was being overshadowed by the interpretation given by the Dutch, French, German, English, who were determining what our history was based on what they did not want people to know in order to justify the slavery, the subjugation of Africa and Africans. Again, 18th and 19th scientific racism was prominent in establishing what we have right now when you speak to folks who think that Africa is nothing more than disease, starvation, and poverty. When you talk to Blacks, FBA in particular, they don't even acknowledge their history, acknowledge the culture of where they come from. They think they were born without being given birth by their mother, if you believe that FBA precedes African American history. So the list goes down here. Sheikh Anta Diop went to bat for us, actually making it known here that there was prominence in Africa long before there were Europeans that even showed up on the stage of world history. And again, he was followed by men such as John G. Jackson, Dr. John Henrik Clark, Dr. Joseph Ben Yakinen, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Amos Williams, Chancellor Williams, Dr. Rashidi, names that I'm sure many of you have never heard or taken the time to understand. And oh, hey, Beat, you back. Unity between all minority groups is a concept of understanding that in the USA, it is a democratic system where the majority rules and the minorities kick rocks. Yep. And by understanding the concept of unity is understanding that the only key power to be able to open the door of liberty, equality, prosperity, and justice for all is unity. And what controls the way or path and power of the land? Basically, unity is the math that equals majority, and majority equals the power to control the way. Yes, unity is how it gets done. Now think about this. I'll show you a perfect example of unity. A lot of Blacks don't realize that the term ghetto did not come into existence to describe where Blacks lived. It was actually in the 16th century in Europe. It was described as where the early Jews lived. Well, I shouldn't say the early Jews, but during that time, that's where Jews lived. They called it a ghetto. Ghetto had nothing to do with Africans, with nothing to do with African Americans. It began as a place of description of where Jews lived in Europe. But look it up. Now, if I've gotten this wrong, I will retract my statement and I'll make clarification in a separate video if need be. But I want you to look up the definition of ghetto and how it came to be known. Take a look, Ghetto. The ghetto, or something like what T-shirt sample, right? And what control, wait a minute, is this? And what control the way or path of power of the land, basically. Unity is the math that equals. I think I already read this, did I? Yeah, I'm sorry, Beat Acting. I read this already, my mistake. So getting back to what I was saying here, you can see that there's a lot of intellectuals, historians, and activists that came to the fight to support Africa, to support Africans all over the diaspora. This is just but a small list. Now, these are the people that FBA will never give any credence to because they're not born in America. They're tethers. And again, as I've stated and Beat Activists stated also, this whole concept of tethering, a negative description of Blacks who supposedly come to America, or African American, Blacks born outside of America who come to America and ride the backs of African Americans, aka Foundation of Black Americans. That's what the tethering insult is supposed to mean. But notice that I have presented here in the last hour, almost 2 hours, how it's nothing more than self-tethering ideology committed by FBA that we're seeing riding the prominence of African Americans with distinction who've already distinguished themselves in history. Can't even make this up, but why would I need to? So I think that here we go. So after listening to individuals who support African history, African diaspora support, I should say, for all of us, whether we come from Africa, from Haiti, from North America, from the Caribbean, even from Brazil. These are men who look to see unity in that. Now, before Leroy cut out it, he tried to say that, oh, there's no work being done in Pan-Africanism. Work for Pan-Africanism goes all the way back to 1900, a little bit further, but this is where you started having the act of formalizing Pan-Africanism. So you've had multiple conferences. Now, I'm not going to read through all of them, but if you want to see the same thing that I'm listing here, let's go ahead and drop that inside of your favorite search tool. So we had a conference in 1900 in England, 1919, Paris, France, 1921, London, 1923, London and Lisbon, 27, New York City, 1945, Manchester, England, 1974, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, 1994, Kampala, Uganda, Uganda. 2014, Johannesburg, South Africa. The latest one was 2025, Lomé, Togo. So when you saw this idiocy that came out of Brown's mouth, Pan-Africanism isn't even being done in Africa. Look at this. Johannesburg, 2014. Uganda, 94. What else here? Just a minute. Let me go back. Actually, I want to. Where was that statement he made? Give me a moment here, folks. Oh, wait. Here's one of the ignorant statements. All Pan-Africans are here in America. Where is it? We look at the church. Stand by, folks. Deviation. Yeah, he's wrong about that. Why Pan-African supporting many times? Married to a Ghanaian, have a son. So I missed this comment earlier where, again, I'm married to a Ghanaian, have a son. I'm still FBA. Okay. That right there is even worse. If you are married to someone from Ghana and you still call yourself FBA, that is the true epitome of what I call cultural disconnection. But we're not going to harp on that. All right? Circles up, circles up. Clearly, him being FBA and being married to a Ghanaian doesn't necessarily mean that he has any knowledge about Africa or even his own history. Again, he has demonstrated this in his commentary. I'm not here to contest what he has to say. I'm here to allow what he has to say substantiate my argument. So clearly, yes, I'm going to have to go back somewhere after the show and find the statement that he made where he said that there is no Pan-African unity in Africa. I swear it was in this section, but you know what? I'm not going to waste the little bit of the show we have left on this. So here's the key thing that I also want to throw up here. Were there enslaved Africans or enslaved descendants of Africans who referred to themselves as being foundational Black Americans while enslaved? Of course there weren't. They weren't, right? But still, I felt the need to make sure this statement was thrown out here so we can start separating. I'm going to use separation properly, separating ourselves from the ignorance that foundational Black Americans are injecting into our history as African Americans. No, enslaved Africans or their descendants did not refer to themselves as foundational Black Americans while enslaved. So if that's the case, why do we have these foundational Black Americans attempting to say that our prominent African American descendants who are descended from African slaves were foundational Black Americans? How does that even exist? How are you attempting to label the folks as being something that you didn't even exist as until 5 minutes ago? All right, correct. All right, 100% agree. Now, I want to make sure everyone understands it. Be active, don't agree with me because it sounds good. Agree with me because you know. And I can say it from what I've seen of Be Active providing here in commentary. Clearly, he knows the same things that I know and where it's derived from. Can't make it up. Don't need to make it up. Anything that I've put in front of you, you can find for yourselves. It should come out to be the exact same thing. The term foundational Black Americans was popularized in recent years, often linked to activists. Now, again, I can't see why anyone would call Tariq Nasheed an activist, but still, like Tariq Nasheed and researchers like Dr. Claude Anderson. Now, Dr. Claude Anderson, I believe his doctorate is in economics. Now, he is not an historian, if I recall correctly, but no, I reserve the right to be wrong, but let's just put it this way. Dr. Anderson is the ideology. He's the center of this nonsense. Yep. I agree because you know and I know the facts. Damn straight, brother. Speak on it. Excuse me. So again, you have Tariq and Anderson are trying to create a specific lineage-based identity. Notice, and I specify here the word create. because that's all they're doing. They're trying to carve out and create some type of lineage where they are taking from, all right? They are tethering themselves to African American history to create a history that never existed. As I said before, FBA's actions right now are nothing more than what I would call stolen valor. If we would look at someone trying to imitate someone who has gone through the battles that come from being in war. You come back with the mental stress, you come back with the images, but still you have gone to battle. You have been a part of it. FBA was never a part of history. FBA is a concept that is trying to create history by usurping history that has already been put in place. Again, name one prominent FBA icon that cannot already be mentioned in history as being an established African American with distinction. I'm going to leave that one out there still. Oh, here we go. Maybe you should look into Pan-Africans, actions to rob FBA using use. So, and here we go. They connected us to Africa as a means to rob us. I tell you, you can't make this up, folks. As always, as I said before, you're going to find those FBA supporters, or should I say the self-tetherers, who will continue to tether themselves to the African American experience, claim prominence that has never been theirs, that never will be theirs. They always like to go after the misinformation that you see that's publicized. U.S. aid was always in place to provide assistance for AIDS research for kids, Alzheimer's research. Now, everything that was about that was done to aid an entire international community, to include AIDS research. So I'm not sure where you get this thing about actions used to rob FBA, because again, FBA has only been around this long. Collectively, the community has rejected y'all. No, collectively, the foundational Black Americans, who again are of no concern. You have no history, you have no lineage. Anything that FBA has been nothing more than self-tethering themselves to the back of African American prominence that came before the concept of the FBA was even created. Again, folks, I'm not one to sit here and try and have an argument, because we already heard my statements. I'm not going to try to convince anyone from FBA and their ideology. No, there's no need to do so. If anything, they're going to substantiate the conversation that I'm presenting. Read a comment section or talk to your family aware of this. Well, you're coming in late, because I read comment sections that show the ignorance and the discontinuity, more or less the cultural disconnection that is held by FBA. So if you need to, go ahead and rewind the show back, partner. Or if you need to, wait until I do the timestamp so you can go to specific parts. You're right. Yep, it's a lineage. All right, it is a lineage. It is not unity. And again, your lineage is based on false attributes that are being taken from actual African American descendants, from Africans who are kidnapped and brought to America. You have no history. You have no foundation. Zero. If you have a foundation, it is one that you are riding the backs of African Americans to create. There's no distinction. You are not unique, FBA. Again, your belief of having a unique and rich history is nothing more than you usurping the history of African Americans who came before you, that you're now riding the backs of to establish yourself as being prominent, being that African Americans who came to America were the last batch of slaves in the New World. Folks, let's go ahead and have a laugh here. We just covered where the term Africans and African Americans came from. We just literally covered this. So again, I'm not going to bother going back over this. No need to. And when the question you ask, what's more important to me, Africans or Black Americans, the importance here is the unity of African Americans along with Africans, along with Haitians, along with Jamaicans. That's what's more important. Now, as you can see here, we've got the same divisive FBA ideology that we've been discussing all throughout. Matter of fact, let me go ahead and put beat back up. Can any FBA point out a single thing FBA has accomplished? Ooh. But in a retort, is Africa united? I'll put it this way. Out of all the countries that exist in Africa, there is more unity than there is separation. See, the thing that FBA likes to do is they'll look for areas of conflict, but then use that to represent the entire continent, as opposed to looking at that dispute that may be in a single area. It's the same thing like in America, where if you would look to find any type of conflict, if you look at what the Conservative Party does, they will go to particular areas and only those areas and say that Chicago is a wasteland. Oh, look what's happening in Maryland, and use that to cast the whole net across the entirety of the United States, which is not a representation. That's what we're getting right now from this FBA member. Oh, goodness. All right, but still, let's keep walking here. So one of the things I also wanted to do, of course, I knew that this didn't exist, but still, for the sake of posterity, I had to throw this out there. Are there any interviews of formerly enslaved African Americans in history on record as specifically describing themselves as having been foundational Black Americans during slavery? Of course, we know that's not the case, but still, if there is no one in history claiming to be foundational Black American, why would individuals pop up in the last 30 years or so and claim that African American history that has already been recorded now has people who consider themselves to be foundational Black Americans? Oh, they built this country. No, they did not. African Americans, African American descendants, descended from African slaves who were brought from Africa, are the ones who are responsible for the foundation of African American history in America. You are not one of us. That is still a fact. No matter what you would like to say to change that, is nothing more than a falsehood. Dude, our ethnic group built this country. No, let me correct you. My ethnic group being African American descendant, is responsible for what's built here. You are nothing more than the divisive rhetoric that has been discussed, and again, you're giving credence to. South Africans are fighting Ghana right now. Nigerians are being banned from other places in other continents. All right, what's up, DJ Biggs? Thanks for rolling through. You're coming in on the tail end of the discussion. So if there's anything that you need enlightenment in, you may want to go back and check the show out so you can gauge how your commentary is going to land here. You all set us up to be financing Rob and taking advantage of us. Who is you? Who is you all? Set who up? Again, you are nobody. FBA is nothing. FBA is that young upstart that shows up at the end of the party thinking that they run the show. Yeah, we in here, we run this. Ignorance as anything. Oh, you know what? Let me do this here. Let me turn the comments back on. All right, so just in case, guys, if I miss your comments, you should be able to see them here on the screen. So going back to the statement that I put in here, again, I know that there is no such thing as FBA. So therefore, because there's no such thing in history as FBA, why would we allow someone who just created this term to try and go back and retroactively claim the history of African Americans who have already put prominence down, who've already been established in recorded history? Why would we let some folks self-tether themselves, to use their word, to our African American history? We're not. So because of this, we have a lot that goes on here. Oh, definitely there is a lot. Oh, chaotic truth. What's going on, man? Hey, yeah, no, I didn't have a link for this show, man, because I've got some place to be here in a minute. But here's what you need to do. I haven't seen you with Fatty in a minute, man. I know that much. I don't normally jump around over to your show because I see exactly what it is that you put out, bro. But still, let's put something here in the future so we can go ahead and have a more discourseful conversation about this. All right. But I really am out of time for tonight. But don't forget, make sure if you need to put the word out here. We'll take a look at this and try and do so. All right. So as I was saying, folks, FBA has no history, never has had a history in the US, none whatsoever. If anything, they're trying to create history by taking history from the African Americans who have already come before them. That's where their history is. And as I've asked before, and the same thing that Beat Active asked, name one prominent FBA icon that is not already listed in history as being an African American of distinction. List one. So moving on here. So we're coming down here. I've got about a good 10 or 15 to go here at best. So let's go ahead and clear this out. So this is an article that came out a couple of days ago. What FBA really means, Foundation of Black Americans Explained. So I want you guys to make sure that you go out to Baller Alert and check this out. Okay, go ahead and check this out for yourselves. Now, this article more or less is a softball article, more or less talking about FBA from the positive stance of not mentioning any of the anti-immigrant rhetoric, not mentioning the divisiveness that we get from them, not listening to what is known, which is claiming African American history to be foundation of Black American history. According to the official website, the designation applies to roughly 43 million Americans who trace their ancestry directly to the freedmen, the enslaved Black people emancipated in the United States after the 13th Amendment. The problem with this is the people that they want to associate themselves with were African Americans. These, again, were African American descendants of enslaved Africans. As I said before, how do you sit here and want to say that I can trace my lineage back to slavery when, in fact, the very institution that you're using to trace said lineage that was put in place that enslaved you was installed by immigrants? I tell you that. You can't put this into more words. I mean, as I said before, FBA loves to accuse Democrats supporting Blacks as being on the plantation. But again, you're the ones claiming that you can trace your lineage back to slavery, which means that you are firmly footed on Massa's property, which is the plantation. You know, Dr. Ivan Van Sertima said decades ago that we live in a society now where marginality can flourish. All right, marginal people can become prominent. All right, they can acquire basic internet connectivity, create a platform, and cause extreme upheaval with unsubstantiated conspiracy related bigoted rhetoric. All right, and then they turn around and share this with the large majority. Absolute madness. Now, as I said before, if anyone has an issue with what I'm saying, just like Dr. Ray Hagan's, put your circle up here. All right, as I said before, make sure that whenever you have an issue with what's being said, put your circle up. Inside this circle exists my anecdotal, lived experiences and exposures I base my life on. If John says something that I don't agree with, it doesn't mean that I'm an idiot or John is a liar. It means I am unfamiliar with the topic being discussed. Again, don't dismiss readily what I'm saying, as I will not dismiss readily what most folks are saying, unless I already know that I'm listening to distortion, which is what FBA ideology is, a distortion of African American history that has already been written in the books. So we've already covered where the term came from. We know where it grew out of. But what concerned me most about this article is how there was nothing in it that went against what the ideology stands for, which is the divisiveness shown against non-Black Americans. All right, those who were born outside of the country. So as I said before, African Americans were the last ones to show up inside of slavery in the Western Hemisphere, preceded only by the slave colonies in Haiti, in the Caribbean, and also in Brazil. These were places where slavery existed almost 90 years before slavery came to North America. Now, what a lot of folks don't realize is that there were a few failed Spanish colonies in the New World. I want to say maybe in 1529. I can't think of the full name of the colony, Guadalupe, or something comes to mind. But in 1529, you had a Spanish party, a sailing ship that came to roughly, I want to say maybe around Georgia or South Carolina, that attempted to start a colony in America. There we go. 100% distortion. Sorry about missing that. But then again, you should be able to catch everything that I'm saying inside of the chat comments. Folks, make sure to look for the comments off on the screen just in case I myself missed them. According to your thoughts on timelines of names, when did the continents become Africa? Are you Aquabuelian? Of course, if anyone doesn't know, yes, Aquabuela was the original name for Africa. So when we go back and look at the timelines, you're going to have to look at the timelines as established by the folks in Africa versus the colonizers who came and changed the name, made Africa what we know, the Greek name, which is, actually, I want to say, well, again, Aquabuela is what it was called internally. But to the colonists, they just named it Africa. And this was the Greeks primarily. So I would say, if you want to know the answer to that, check the timelines, provide them. Watching you speak about my peoples makes me want to watch Hotel Rwanda. All right, sure. Don Cheadle provided an excellent performance. The first Black people in the Americas, included what is now USA, came from Spanish. By the first Black people were not even slaves. Are you Ethiopian then? Oh my goodness, the foolishness that we get here. But bro, I'm going to let you go ahead and comment because I've got to hurry up and get out of here. But again, as I was saying, so in 1529, you had colonies that came, Spanish colonies that failed. One of them in particular, the Guadalupe, 1529, failed because of starvation, because of disease, but primarily because of the 100 slaves they brought with them revolted. So what happened to those slaves? These slaves were left behind. Therefore, they acclimated into the local Indian population, which brings us into the other story that we start getting now, are pretendians. All right, now we're talking about the folks who seem to believe that African Americans are indigenous to North America. No, we are not. Different show. But still, the most polarizing aspect here is that even FBA, they've got flags now. They've got symbols. Look at this. The movement has its own flag, known as the Maroon Flag. It features 5 stars representing the 5 primary regions where escaped enslaved Africans form independent Maroon communities: Virginia, Florida, Mississippi, Louisiana, Carolinas. The flag also displays an axe and a torch, weapons Maroons used during freedom revolts. As I said before, these revolts, even if you look at it from Nat Turner, from Denmark Vesey, these were not foundational Black Americans. These were African American descendants of enslaved Africans who were responsible for these revolts. The most successful revolts were actually the ones that were in Haiti, that were in the Spanish colonies. They were able to root out their oppressor. The reason being, they didn't have all the land that we have in America that made it difficult to communicate and to organize. Whereas in the islands, they were all packed into one area. And because of being packed into one area, being that they were predominantly from West Africa, although you did have Africans who were brought from the other side of Africa to meet the slave ships, they managed to communicate. Whether you're talking about the Igbo and the Akan, I think it was primarily Akan, but yes. If I'm wrong on that, I'll correct myself, but I know primarily that the Akan were able to communicate with the other tribes that were there, and they formulated the system. And because of that, they were able to communicate with the slaves who worked in the house. The slaves in the house worked with the slaves out in the fields in the Spanish colonies, whereas the slaves in the house in America were separate and did not communicate and work with the slaves out in the fields a majority of the time. They were separate. That was another reason why revolts were not so successful in the States. Oh my gosh. Haiti, Hispaniola, and Puerto Rico, where the first revolts happened. Yep. Oh, look at this. You need to do more research when you have a lot of false premises creating from PanAfrican. Again, folks, anything that I put here, you can justify. What can't be justified will be the statements that we're hearing right now, folks, again, who have not put up their circles. If you can't put up your circle and recognize, maybe I don't know this, then just continue commenting and substantiating my statements. But as I said here, this was a softball conversation for the most part, giving credence to FBA. But I will leave this here for anyone who wants to go back and take a look at it again. It was from Baller Alert a few days ago. What FBA really means, Foundation of Black Americans Explained. So this was something that came out a while ago. I'm running late. From the Black Agenda Report, The Folly of So-Called Foundation of Black Americans. Now, as it goes here, we'll just go ahead and just put this in there because I really don't have the time to go through it, but I just want to make sure that you understand that what I've stated is not just from me. It has already been recognized that FBA has no history, but what you don't have are enough folks who are willing to come out and make that statement. If I need to be one who stands 10 toes down, then so be it. Look for me, John Henrik. We need to get an understanding of this term that people throw around, what it is to be Black American. Black American, again, people want to say, oh, it's a lineage. Or if you don't tie the direct lineage, they'll try and say that FBA is a lineage. All right, no, what this is a distortion because there's no history that exists for FBA unless FBA self-tethers to the back of the African Americans who created this history. Otherwise, there is nothing. But this article goes into speak to what I'm speaking of right now. Talks about how this is a detriment to us as far as unity, to have Blacks inside a circle of others wagging their fingers. Why the disparagement? Why the negativity shown towards your own? But this is masses training, as I've said before. This is that separation that has been taught. Matter of fact, let me go back. Where is it? Let me bring this back up here just to put this back in focus here. All right, get a look at that. All right, I want you to see that. Malcolm X, Harriet Tubman, Booker T. Washington, Martin Luther King. The disappointment of our own trying to undermine our history. So again, the name of this article, The Folly of So-Called Foundational Black Americans. All right, so we've come to that part here where it's time to get out of here. But before we do, let's have this brief conversation about reparations here. So here's something I asked. Was reparations for the Holocaust paid to Jews in Europe and America, or just in Europe only, or in America? Holocaust reparations from Germany were paid to Jewish survivors globally, covering those in Europe, America, Israel, and other nations, not just one region. But the thing here is that that payment was for the survivors. All right, we need to look at this. It was for the survivors of that. Now, I'll go 10 toes down. Yes, if everyone else can get reparations, why can't we? Those of Jewish faith got reparations. The Japanese held in internment camps got reparations. But if I recall, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago in Oklahoma, I think the last survivor of the slaughter of Wall Street, of Black Wall Street, I believe they dismissed the call for reparations. And I think they did it with prejudice to make sure that it would not come up again. Can you believe that? How do you go about giving reparations to those, again, not that it wasn't deserved, but their suffering was less than 10 years? Again, not saying that it wasn't deserved, but you have a suffering and subjugation going 200 years that can't even be brought for discussion, that finally ends up being dismissed with prejudice so that it is no longer discussed. That lets you know how, I won't say convenient, but lets you know how bad people want to move away from the discussion of reparations with African Americans. So the question I ended up asking, were reparations paid to family members of the Jewish Holocaust who had died before receiving payment? Yes, reparations were paid to the heirs of family members of the Holocaust victims who died before receiving payment, but they had specific conditions. And of course, you had the claims that you had to fill out funds. But the thing here is that those folks who were not around to receive the money for the reparations, it was paid to their, excuse me, to their heirs. Or let's go ahead and call them, descendants, however you want to call it, but anyone who was affiliated with that. Which brings me to my final statement here. Does FBA qualify for reparations? The answer is no. FBA does not qualify for reparations. Why? Because FBA was just created not more than a moment ago. When you go back and take a look at who does qualify for reparations, it will be people who were known as African or African American, Afro-American, Africo-American. I showed this list to you, but nowhere in that list did you see foundational Black Americans, because no one was identified as such back then during the course of slavery. So why would you let anyone who has no history to speak of, who has no affiliation with slavery, because no one in FBA was ever a part of slavery? Now, as an African descendant, I can say that yes, I have ancestors who were a part of slavery because they were African descendant from Africans who themselves were kidnapped and brought to America. Now, let's think about this. If I stole your car and I had it for a day and the cops found me with it, they would give you back what was taken from you, right? Yes, because that's how you expect it to work, right? Your reparation would be the returning of your stolen property. We've seen here, or if you follow the news, there was an African American family, aka Black, what you want to call it, out on the West Coast, who had land taken from them back in the 20s that was finally given back to them. The city gave it back. I mean, we're talking about a full area where Blacks back in the 1915, 1920, I want to say I've got the years right, but still it was Black owned, that was taken away by white developers. But again, they got their land back. Call that a small shade of reparations. But the thing here to think about, folks, I want you to keep this in mind here, is that you can't ask for something that you didn't work for. More so, if I were to think about who is more deserving of reparations or who is also deserving of that, what if we look at the aspect that they talked about here just a moment ago, where I showed you that folks of German descent, or not German, but Jewish faith, no matter where they were in the world, it said that they received reparations in Europe, in Israel, in America. And those who were not alive to receive it, it was passed on to their heirs. So with that being said, if I were to think of this as far as reparations, where would it start? Well, it wouldn't start with the FBA, because as I said before, FBA, there weren't FBA back in the days of slavery. All right, so therefore you guys don't qualify. You don't get reparations. The fact that you want to create a niche out of this, out of divisive rhetoric to give yourselves a conversation for reparations is ridiculous. You can't even write this. All right, so you guys are out. There's no reparations for FBA because there's no one in the history of slavery that identified as such. FBA is riding the back of foundational nonsense, of self-tethering ideology. They're riding the back of African Americans with distinction who actually are responsible for the foundation that Black history exists upon. You have no history. You have no claims to reparations because there was no one foundational Black American in the fields, period. So if we had to do reparations, we're talking about having to look at folks from Africa who had their lineage stolen from them. Now, again, if reparations can be paid out all over the world to include Israel and Europe, why would reparations not be paid to the folks in Africa whose lineage they can trace directly to the beach, to the day that their family members were stolen from them? Again, that's just a concept. All right, now, folks, I am now 20-something minutes over. I should have been gone here, but still, I appreciate the conversation that we got here in the crowd. Although, was it fruitful? It depends upon what your ideology is. As I said before, if you have an issue with what's being said, put your circle up. All right, let it be known. Put your circle up if it bothers you enough. And on this note, I'm going to leave it with this last thing right here. Pan-African is not in Africa, but in America. Why are you fighting for? Okay. So again, for those of those who watched the show, we saw that I listed that we had Pan-Africanism that was seen in Africa, to include the major conferences of Pan-African conferences that have been taking place since the 1900s. All right. So again, I appreciate it. DJ Biggs, your commentary has done nothing more than substantiate my statements tonight. I appreciate you for doing that. Beat Active, thank you for representing with what is documented in history as being facts. You are not one of us. Same thing as DJ Biggs. I appreciate you for substantiating the conversation and validating what I had to say with your commentary. Thank you for showing up. And who else do we have in here tonight? Chaotic dropped by for a second. I don't rock with Chaotic at all, but still, Chaotic is a content creator. He has information that is completely to the other side of what I have to talk about, but still, nonetheless, I'll see about getting together with Chaotic here, and we'll see what has to be said, and we'll have a go at it, right? But until then, Chaotic, appreciate you dropping by. Who else? I think that's pretty much it. So what else can I say here at this point? Find somebody who knows somebody to tell somebody about what we've got going on over here. If you like it, let me know. Share it if you do. And subscribe if this is what you're looking for. All right, folks. Appreciate you from stopping in. Hey, by all means, check out my YouTube page, youtube.com/1970 John Henry. You can also catch me on TikTok at tiktok.com/1970 John Henry. I'm out.